Good evening. I'm Michael Steele in for Simone Sanders. Coming up this hour, critical testimony. That's what the January 6th committee says they got from Trump's former White House counsel, Pat Cipollone. So how will this play into Tuesday's hearing? Focused on what some members have called the marshaling of the mob, a sort of coordinated effort between Trump, his top aides and associates, and white nationalists. Also, we're finally getting an actual look inside the White House and hearing President Trump describe January 6th in his own words, with the release of a highly anticipated documentary, Unprecedented. Plus, one Florida county slapping a warning notice on LGBTQ plus kids in phys ed classes and overnight field trips. Just the latest example of schools putting their own restrictions in place in response to the so-called Don't Say Gay bill. You're watching Simone on MSNBC, and we have a lot to talk about. We're going to start with what's in store this week when the January 6th committee will hold two public hearings on Tuesday and Thursday, making its final push to show Donald Trump's role in the plot to overturn the 2020 election, including the violent and deadly attack on the Capitol by a mob of insurrectionists and the ongoing threat to democracy. It will be the first opportunity for the public to see clips from the star witness Pat Cipollone's recorded testimony last week. The former White House counsel was reportedly cooperative, and the panel has requested the unedited version of Alex Holder's newly released documentary, Unprecedented. So we could see some behind-the-scenes footage not included in the final cut, although it's not clear just how much we will learn from it. What we did learn is that the Trump kids had nothing to say about January 6th.
You said before you didn't want to talk about Capitol. Should we move on?
Yeah, let's skip to 6.
Let's go to NBC's Julia Jester at the Capitol, where anticipation is building, and she's getting new information about the committee's witness list. Julia, we've heard another big player, Steve Bannon, could testify at some point. What are you learning?
So, Michael, I actually just learned what one of those witnesses on Tuesday, who that will be. Jason Van Tatenhove, a former spokesman for the Oath Keepers, will be testifying at Tuesday's hearing. Now, it's important to note that Van Tatenhove was not with the Oath Keepers or part of the organization on or around January 6th. He actually hasn't been since about 2017. But what he can provide, as he did in his testimony behind closed doors back in March, is the context of the Oath Keepers as this extremist group and the dangers that its propaganda and its radicalization have posed. So Van Tatenhove is expected to speak to the personal interactions he's had with Stuart Rhodes, who actually lived with him for a number of months, years prior. And so Van Tatenhove will be able to help bolster the committee's argument that these extremist groups are extremely dangerous, having worked with them as its national media director for a number of years. So he's going to help the committee thread together the messaging of President Trump and his allies leading up to and on January 6th with this parallel track of these extremist groups that essentially led part of the attack on the Capitol, the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys. Take a listen to what Representative Stephanie Murphy said about this convergence and how the committee plans to address this in Tuesday's hearing.
We will lay out the body of evidence that we have that talks about how the president's tweet on the wee hours of December 19th of Be There, Be Wild was a siren call to these folks. And we'll talk in detail about what that caused them to do, how that caused them to organize, as well as who else was amplifying that message.
So messaging is a key part, both in how the groups like the Oath Keepers were using their own propaganda to raise money and grow in prominence, as well as President Trump and his allies using the messaging of a rigged election, and how all of these converged on January 6th. Now, as you mentioned, there are a lot of other factors at play ahead of these highly anticipating hearings this week. We have Steve Bannon, whose lawyer wrote a letter to the committee overnight saying that President Trump waived his executive privilege and therefore Bannon is willing to testify, in fact, prefers to testify publicly. It remains to be seen if the committee will agree to those terms, but I know that they do want to hear from Steve Bannon, as a number of the members said as much this morning. And then we are waiting to hear clips from Pat Cipollone's testimony on Friday. Trump's former White House counsel met with the committee. He was there for about more than 8 hours, and so he has provided a lot of highly critical information to the committee. A committee spokesman telling NBC News that Cipollone's testimony underscored Donald Trump's, quote, dereliction of duty, and also corroborated key elements of Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony. So a lot to pack into these hearings this week, Michael.
I can imagine. I can imagine. NBC's Julia Jester, thank you very much. So here talking all things January 6th is our legal panel. Glenn Kirshner is a former federal prosecutor and MSNBC legal analyst. And Kyle Cheney is the senior legal affairs reporter for Politico. Welcome, gentlemen. So, my buddy Glenn, as of now, there are only 2 hearings left, supposedly, right? It's crunch time, baby. Here we go. What do you think needs to be the final salvo to bring this investigation all the way home?
Well, I think one of the things that we're watching for is, the testimony from the Oath Keepers or about the Oath Keepers, testimony about the Proud Boys, because we're all waiting to see what links can be made from the Oath Keepers, perhaps to the War Council at the Willard War Room, and then directly to the Oval Office. So I think that's something that we're going to be watching for. And it really is interesting, Michael, that reporting we just heard about how a former Oath Keepers spokesperson who also apparently lived with Stewart Rhodes is prepared to come in and testify live, not video clips. That tells me the J6 committee has a high degree of confidence in the power and truthfulness and accuracy of what he is about to testify to. I think it also helps explain why all of a sudden Stewart Rhodes is desperate to testify. We don't know that he will because he's pending trial in a seditious conspiracy case. So, but some of these things now seem to be falling into place.
Yeah.